Good evening, everyone. My name's Leslie Pitts, and I'm the Executive Manager and President of the Mary Baker Eddy Library. Welcome tonight. Welcome to our program. Thank you for joining us for the fourth program in this series, Strength of Spirit, Engaging with Mary Baker Eddy 100 Years Later, in which we look at different aspects of the life of this woman who rose from very humble beginnings to become a household name after she published a book that challenged the theological, scientific, and medical thinking of her day. During the first 3 months of our programs, we've talked with those engaged in thinking and writing about her ideas, and doing it in different media, in film, in theater, and in literature. And over the next few months, we're going to continue that theme, but we're also going to talk to guests whose life work exemplifies Mary Baker Eddy's own sense of service. Now, a century has passed since thousands flocked to Concord and to Boston to hear Mary Baker Eddy speak. But the library's mission is to provide opportunities for the public to get to know her once again. The path she forged and the conclusions she reached in a century not always comfortable with women of achievement remain relevant to many audiences today. And I hope you're going to join us again next week. Next Thursday night, we have another program where we're going to welcome Barbara Dossi and Julia Nacy for Nursing the Modern World, Florence Nightingale and Mary Baker Eddy's legacies. Now, Florence Nightingale is also celebrating her centenary this year, so it seemed an appropriate time to take a close look at these two women together. Barbara is a holistic nursing scholar, a biographer of Florence Nightingale, and she's the co-director of the Nightingale Initiative for Global Health. And Julia is a Christian Science teacher and practitioner. And together, Barbara and Julia are going to focus on how the visions of these two women contribute to caring and healing today. Now, information about past events at the library, and we've had quite a number this year already, are on our website, and you can listen or view those programs on your home computer, and we hope you'll do that, including the live web forum we did at the beginning of this month, where Gillian Gill came back and was a special guest at the library. And Gillian and I answered questions from the audience on this centenary series and about Mrs. Eddy's life. So I hope you'll tune in and listen in on the website if you missed any of those programs. Well, tonight, Jonathan Eder, the library's programs producer, is going to introduce us to some guests who I know you'll realize straight away exemplify the pioneering and philanthropic spirit of Mary Baker Eddy. And you'll learn more about that in our latest exhibit out in the lobby, entitled Mary Baker Eddy, A Life of Service. So before you go home, take a look at the exhibit if you haven't had time beforehand. So enjoy the program, and I hope you'll come back again next week.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Leslie, for that kind introduction. It's really wonderful for me to be here with this group of people on stage. They're an inspiration and they're a delight, and they're a reminder to me of just the benefits for an individual personally to be engaged in a life of service, because they have such a shine and such a sparkle and such an enthusiasm for the world and for living. And that was certainly something that was so important to Mary Baker Eddy. And I think, here at the library, our charge is really to care for the history of Mary Baker Eddy and her story, and to make that story available through a variety of means and channels and perspectives. But one thing that comes through in her story is that as she went through life, her dedication to humanity and to the world only grew stronger with every stage and every phase that she went through. And in some ways, it really culminated with her founding of the Christian Science Monitor newspaper. This is something she did in her 87th year. She was well on in life, and yet her dedication to applying the principles that she felt were so important about addressing human ills and finding the means to transform human experience into what it really is intended to be, the essence of her vision of humanity as loved and as a source of love and as a source of transformation and healing in our world. And with a non-religious focus, she established this newspaper, but still with this heightened, inspired vision to seek out and search for those problems in the world, those ills in the world, but at the same time to reveal how there is always a means, and there is always an energy, and there's always a possibility of finding solutions. And so the Monitor is really dedicated to that type of journalism, which is sometimes referred to as solution-oriented journalism. And in that context, it looks for those individuals, like two of the people that we have here in our panel today, who, in a very earnest and grassroots level, are looking to improve our world and to extend an embrace of caring to their fellow human being. So that's really what our program is about, is that great legacy that Mary Baker Eddy has left with the Christian Science Monitor newspaper and how it's expressing itself today. And so I'm just delighted to have all of you here with us, and I'd like to introduce to you my co-panelist. Immediately to my right is Corinne Almquist, and she, as you can tell, is very young, but is still making a profound difference in our world. She's a recent graduate of Middlebury College, and she's going to tell you a lot more about her story and her initiative and her work. But at Middlebury, she was an environmental studies and religion studies major, and she has really found a very unique and profound way to put those two areas of concentration together and to work in her life since college by founding and directing a GLEANING project to address issues of hunger in our world. And I'll let Corinne, you tell us a bit more about that in just a moment. To Corinne's right is Xanthe ACKERMAN, and Xanthe is also very young. But again, this is evidence that age was not a barrier to Mary Baker Eddy at age 87 to be making a big difference in our world, and it's not a barrier to people who are just getting started in life either. And Xanthe has a very interesting story to tell about how her areas of interest in terms of development in other parts of the world sort of came together with the assistance and sort of spotlight of the Christian Science Monitor, and bringing about a new organization that's really providing much greater educational opportunity to a population who'd really been ignored in that respect in the continent of Africa. And then to Xanthe's right is David Scott, who's international editor of the Christian Science Monitor.
Not so young.
Who is getting younger by the day. In fact, when we first met for our pre-program discussion, he looked a lot older. And so I'm interested to see how he looks after he may be extremely young in 90 minutes' time. So, David, if we could just get started with you, and if you could elaborate a little bit more about how, about the theme of public service in the press and how that relates to the Christian Science Monitor and to your work.
Sure, Jonathan, and thank you. And I have to first start by saying it's just really an honor to be here with Xanthe and Corinne, because these are two individuals who have each taken an idea and just breathed life into it and are changing lives. So they're social entrepreneurs, if you will. And social entrepreneurs kind of look at the world and decide that they're not totally content with the way it is now and decide to do something about it. And in that sense, they're not too different from that 87-year-old woman who, in the summer of 1908, decided to, she looked at the world and wasn't content with what she saw in the world of journalism and decided to do something about it. So she founded the Christian Science Monitor, and in its first edition, which came out in the fall of 1908, there was an editorial in which she directed and mandated the purpose of the paper to be injure no man, but to bless all mankind. So as an editor at the Monitor, well, actually, there have been editors throughout the last century who have thought about this and used this as a guide to how they work. The way I break it down for me is the injure no man is about expressing compassion. Having a compassionate approach to what you do, to how you approach your subjects, to how you explain the situation that they're in, and a compassionate approach to the readers, helping the readers understand what it is that's going on in the world. And then bless, well, that to me just means being constructive. Have a constructive approach to your journalism. And then the all mankind part, well, that's easy as the international editor. That just means we're global. So to me, it breaks down to that we're compassionate and constructive in our approach, and we're global in our outlook or perspective, because the Monitor is not just for, the Monitor has a purpose, in a sense, I believe, to help us get beyond our own problems and our own situations, our own family situations, and have a broader perspective or outlook on things. So with that as our guide, we think about the news each day and I think about the events that are going on. And I think in a lot of newspapers, as you look at what's going on in the world, there's a bias towards the bad news in the sense that the bad news is easy. You know, it's an explosion somewhere. It's an accident. It's a fire. It's something that's demanding your immediate attention. It's sensational. But that's not the whole world. That's not all that's going on. The good news tends to have a slower fuse. It tends to be less in your face. It doesn't announce itself with a gunshot. It is still, though, as important, if not more important. A little example might be if you were out here on the plaza and there was a car fire on Mass Ave. What would happen is the fire engine comes screaming down the street and the fire would get put out. And if you went around the plaza and asked 100 people what just happened in the last 5 minutes, everybody would tell you about that fire. 9 out of 10 people would tell you about that fire, and that'd be right. That's what happened here today. Was that the most important thing happening here today? Well, was that the most important thing, or was it the young woman at the far corner of the plaza from Berkeley who's just written a song and was raising money for Haiti? Or was it Corinne over in another corner of the plaza talking to a local farmer about his excess produce and telling that farmer about a local soup kitchen, hooking that up? Or was it Xanthe meeting with a correspondent or a journalist in a newspaper, this happened, out on the plaza, and explaining about this young woman who'd just come from Malawi who was going to Exeter Academy? Each of these are important events. And which is the most important one? Well, the Monitor tends to gravitate towards all of those, but to take into account some of these other things that are going on in the world. There's Richard Bergenheim wrote this in 2005, former editor of the Monitor, and it kind of explains how he saw things and how we saw things. So I thought I'd just read it real quickly here, because Richard had a role in how we covered and dealt with the origin of AIDS in Africa, the group that Xanthe founded. Richard wrote, "When much in the media shows men and women at their worst, something is needed to honor the decency, courage, and selflessness that surround us. It is important to shine a light on the work of those who are dedicated to delivering people from disaster, famine, or extermination. Often, it is people of faith who've been moved to help the most unfortunate in the world, and their stories should be told. And when so many are faced with inequality in education and opportunity, it is essential that this be exposed. Whatever and whoever is working to remedy this deserves to be lauded and known." So tonight I think we're going to laud and get to know a little bit more about Corinne and Xanthe's work.
Thank you, David. Yeah, Corinne, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what inspired you to glean.
Right, well, as Jonathan mentioned, I have started a gleaning program over in Vermont, and for those of you who've never heard of gleaning, I don't blame you, most people haven't, but it's the act of harvesting surplus food from farms to bring to food shelves or senior citizens' homes or low-income families or anyone who doesn't have access to fresh produce. And I was doing it before I realized that I was doing it. I worked in the market garden at Middlebury College, and we have sort of a large garden and a small farm that supplies a lot of the produce to the school and to local restaurants. And whenever we had extra, we would always harvest it and bring it to the local food shelf. And we just did it without thinking about it. And then one day, the advisor to the garden told me that there was actually a name for what we were doing, and that it was called gleaning. And I'd never heard about it, and surprisingly, since I was a religious studies major, but then once I started to look into it and study its history, which dates back to before biblical times, I just discovered about what a beautiful practice it is that has these incredible ancient roots and yet is really being revived today as this incredible way to increase food access, to reduce food miles on the food that we eat, to reduce the food waste on farms, and basically just to increase the celebration of local foods and make sure that the local foods movement is really empowering everybody and that everyone can be a part of it. And so having studied environmental studies and religion, I was really drawn towards gleaning as both an old and a new approach to really solving some of the most critical problems with food and hunger that we see in the world today. And so I pursued a fellowship to get funding to start gleaning programs in Vermont and was awarded the fellowship. So I've been working for the last year on coordinating gleaning around Vermont. And what my original advisor in the garden had told me about was a woman in northern Vermont who had started a gleaning program from a farm. And basically, she was just working on a regular farm and saw everything that was just being wasted. It grew too fast, the farmer couldn't get to it, it had a slight blemish, and so they would just throw it in the compost pile. And she thought, well, wait a minute, there must be something better we can do with all of this food, especially since 1 in 10 Vermonters, just like 1 in 10 people in the United States, are living off of food stamps. And so she started a gleaning program in that county, and that grew and grew and grew until the Vermont Food Bank eventually decided to take it as a part of their own programs. And so they hired gleaning coordinators around the state. And so that's how I started. I went out with their gleaning coordinators and I learned everything that I could. And then I branched out on my own and I started doing farmers market gleaning, which wasn't happening in Vermont yet. And that's just the greatest introduction to gleaning. You basically show up at the end of a farmer's market and take anything that the farmers haven't sold and bring it back to food shelves. So I started that in 6 or 7 different towns around Vermont, and then I moved over back to Addison County, where Middlebury College is located, and launched a gleaning program there in partnership with a local anti-poverty organization. And it was just an incredible experience to be able to work with this organization that has already been working in the county for a long time and to bring this new program to them. And they were so excited about the idea of really connecting all of the local farms in Addison County with the people who need that food the most. And if you've ever been to a food shelf, a lot of the food that's on the shelves is highly processed, highly packaged, lots of fats and sugars, and it's not the healthiest food, and it's not food that people should be eating if they're trying to stay healthy and if they're trying to live productive lives. And people always think about the local foods movement as something that only the elite can afford, but that's not the case. There's so many farms, and all of our neighbors are growing food, and it's just a really simple process of closing that gap. And so I was working for about 2 or 3 months, gleaning in Addison County, and just in those couple months we were able to get almost 9,000 pounds of produce distributed to local food shelves in the county. And that's just a small fraction of what can be done, I think, in this coming year and in future years. And it just really snowballed from there. Once I started gleaning and meeting with farmers and activists, and I got school kids involved and Boy Scouts involved. If you promise Boy Scouts large tools, they'll do anything for you. So it's just really, it's so much fun to engage kids of all ages. And I started getting church groups involved there are certain crops that we gleaned so much of that the food shelves, all of the food shelves in Addison County couldn't even handle them, like apples. And so I had all of these church groups chopping up apples and freezing them to make apple pie filling, which we then handed out in Thanksgiving baskets. And we had church groups processing applesauce for hours at a time. So that was really fun. And then I was able to teach a class at Middlebury College on food justice in Vermont, which was really great. And so I got students at the college level involved. And there's just been this overwhelming sense of community support for this initiative. And it's just something that makes so much sense. If any of you have ever had a home garden, there's always stuff that you can't get to. Things grow really tall and you don't have time to pick them. And so what I've been trying to do is just get that food that's growing anyway and get it into the hands of people who need it most. And it's been a remarkable journey. And I'm just so grateful for all the people who've supported it, both in Vermont and then people across the country who have heard about it through the Christian Science Monitor or through other avenues and have just really been a great, great support and an inspiration to me.
So how did the Christian Science Monitor come into your experience?
Right, so the Christian Science Monitor decided to do a story about the gleaning program, and so they came up and interviewed me during an apple glean that I was doing at an orchard. And they ran a story basically just about the project, about how I was harvesting surplus food from farms and bringing it out to food shelves. And just from that simple story about one person doing a local project, I got people from all over the country emailing me saying, well, how do I start gleaning in my community? Which is incredible. And so I was able to lead people through the process and sort of brainstorm with them about the existing local resources in their towns and how they could use those to start gleaning programs and talk to them about what they needed and who they should talk to. And so it was really, I was in awe that just hearing, just that spark of an idea to someone could really cause people to get so excited about launching it on their own and feel really empowered to do something similar. And that's the great thing about gleaning, is it can really be replicated anywhere.
David, if somebody wanted to look at the article that the Monitor wrote about Corinne and gleaning, how would they do that? How would they access that?
Is this the shameless comment portion of our show? Yeah, it's csmonitor.com. You can find it there. If you type in the search Corinne Almquist or gleaning, I believe you will get it if our search engine is working properly. If you have back copies of the print magazine, where would they find that? What the date? Do you remember the date?
That was probably November.
November of last year.
Somewhere around there, yeah. Yeah, you probably won't actually find me in the plaza talking to farmers. They don't tend to hang out there too much.
Yeah, I haven't met any farmers on the plaza yet myself, but you're the investigative journalist, so I'm sure they're there.
Bad example.
Well, Xanthe, tell us about your sort of remarkable and interesting story.
Thank you. Well, just first, I want to echo the sentiments here. I also really feel honored to be here and want to thank you, Jonathan and Leslie, and everyone for being here and giving me a chance to tell the story of advancing girls' education in Africa, which is definitely not my story alone to tell. It involves lots of people, including and especially Christian Science Monitor readers. So it's a special thing to get to be here and to tell that. So this story starts in 2005, and I was actually doing an internship between the 2 years of my master's at the Fletcher School, the Graduate School for International Affairs over at Tufts University. So between the 2 years, we all go off to do our internships, and I went to Malawi with CARE, a non-governmental organization doing great work there. And a close friend of mine, Nat Hoops, was interning here at the Christian Science Monitor. We'd all gone our disparate ways. And I was doing a project evaluating a program that was helping women to just gain some basic financial skills and start small businesses, small enterprises. And I got a phone call from Nat saying, you know, the G8 summit is coming up in a couple of weeks. They're going to be focusing on poverty in Africa. And well, I told the Christian Science Monitor, you might be able to do a story. So how about that? So almost looking back on it, I felt lucky at the time, but now I feel so much even more lucky because it was just the experience of a lifetime to get paired with a phenomenal editor who had this great story idea, which was, let's explore what does it actually look like to live on $1 a day. It's really incomprehensible, and we're talking about, you know, so many of the world's people living under the international poverty line. Malawi being a good country to study because half of the people there are, you know, living in poverty, according to that measure. So I went out to the village, and I went hunting down Selena Boniface, who was the uneducated but very dynamic female leader of one of the groups that I'd been studying. And I followed her around. You know, she thought it was a little bizarre that I wanted to know everything. You know, how much did that cost? How much did that cost? How did you do that? Okay, now these donuts you're selling, how much do those cost? You know, so I just chronicled everything about her life and came back, you know, let the monitor know what I'd collected, and they said, okay, now go get more. So I went back, and just in the way of getting to know her, I got to know her family, including a couple of her children who are around. And I wrote one line in that article: her daughter, Anesi, isn't going to school. She dropped out of the 8th grade, but her older son, Silfrid, is continuing at the 11th grade. So I had no idea what that line was going to do, you know, how that line was going to impact my life. But the article comes out, wonderful thing, and, you know, go to sleep, wake up the next day, and David Scott has completely bombarded my inbox. Why are there 20 letters in my inbox? So I go in there, and it turns out that Christian Science Monitor readers have picked up on this article, and it's really struck a chord. And they want to know, what about this NSE girl? What's going on there? Why isn't she going to school? Why is her brother going to school? And furthermore, what can we do to help? We want to do something, and we want you to do something. So, you know, so much for sitting in the office quietly today. So I went back and forth, you know, communicated a lot with David and others here at the Monitor, and we pulled it all together and realized there was a real trend, a real desire to do something, and there are actually pledges of support, people saying, we would put money behind this, we want to do something to make a change. So I took those pledges in mind and went out to the village and tried to investigate a little bit, okay, what's really going on here? And learned a couple of things. First of all, in Malawi in general, there's quite a lot of support for primary education, including the US government. Lots of money coming in to just help girls and boys, get to primary schools and get a decent primary education, but really very little at the secondary level. That's not something that's been tackled to the same extent. And also primary education has been free in Malawi for some time. And so people are able to send their children to the nearby primary schools, usually in the village, you know, just don't throw away. But the secondary schools actually charge tuition, you know, in cash. And now we're talking about families that have very little income of any kind. The majority of people in Malawi are subsistence farmers, so to actually come by the cash to send the 5 or 6 children in the family to school is very difficult. And so, you know, the older women that I talked to in the community, they said, you know, it's not that we're trying to keep these girls out of school, it's just we have to make choices. This is poverty speaking, okay? And if we're gonna send one or the other child to school, there's 2 reasons why we'll send the boy, at least. One, they expect that the males will earn more over time when they get out into the market. And 2, girls are just so helpful at the, you know, in the home. They're able to cook and clean and take care of siblings. So that's too much to lose. So the families make choices, and that's how it ends up happening. And it's true for so many girls. Only a quarter of girls in Malawi are actually getting into the secondary school system. And in the village where I studied, for example, no girl had finished secondary school. So this is just throughout Malawi and lots of other countries as well. But the village elders, they said, you know, this isn't what we want. Maybe we can select some of the girls who have shown some promise and give them a chance. So that's basically what we did. So I talked again with David and others here. I said, how are we going to do this? How do we logistically figure out how to connect the desire of these readers to help with this completely remote village? And how do we make this work? So the monitor came up.
So can I interrupt for
Yeah,
just a
sure.
second? Because we didn't know what we were doing at this point. The readers kept telling us, we want to send money to this girl, you know, and we don't want it to go to some international group. And, you know, so we sort of felt some obligation to the readers to try to see this through.
Right.
And Xanthe was very, you know, was consulting with people at her end. And, you know, she's saying, well, if you give that family a bunch of money, that will totally ruin their position in that particular community. It's not a good idea to just dump a bunch of money on them. And really, there are better things to do. And so that's when you came up with this plan of sort of going to the village and seeing what the village as a whole wanted, and that way we could help the village work this through.
Right.
But we are, as journalists, hadn't encountered anything quite like this, where we were trying to figure out, well, how do we maintain the relationship with the readers, be true to them and the story, and yet not just throw the money down some hole and never know what happened to it.
Right, right. And it's hard because when you're faced with extreme need, you know, one family in need or a community in immediate need for food or other things, it's hard to say to yourself, okay, how do we address this in a way that can have a lasting impact in it? And so that was a challenge. So we had a lot of back and forth, which was really a good process. And so what the monitor ended up doing was to create a fund where readers could send that money in and know that it would be safe and a secure process. Then that money came over to Malawi, and some volunteers that I knew from Care Malawi said, okay, we're gonna make this happen. So even after I left, they were going to be going back and forth and helping these girls to get the tuition to go to the community school, which was an hour's walk from their village. And so that was the beginning. So the Monitor published an update and an op-ed just explaining all the issues about education in Malawi. And readers sent in money, and they said, "Okay, we're going to be a part of this. We're in this now." So they saw the picture of those girls in their Sunday best, and they said, "Okay, these are our girls." So I went back to Fletcher and I sent out an email, and that's when the other aspect of this, just network of people and channel of feeling around this issue came in, because I heard back from a number of people, and with those people, that's really how AGE started. And actually, two of my colleagues from those early days are here, Jessica Dunsmore and Sarah Lance, who both still work with AGE. And we got together and said, okay, we've got money here that we can do good things with, but we need to become a formal organization. We need to be autonomous so that we can do this in the proper way. So let's go ahead, let's do this work, let's get it done. So we started getting through that process. Then we applied for and received a grant from Tufts to go down to Malawi at the end of the year and just evaluate what was happening, how everything had gone with our volunteers and with those girls through the year. And what we found was, this is good, what we've done is good, but we need to do more. this community school down the road, it's not what we think the monitor readers want for these girls, because, you know, there's 100 kids in a classroom. The girls are renting a room. They're not in the kind of environment that we want to see them in, and they need more support. So we committed to raising more funds for each girl and to getting them into boarding schools, and that was an important step for us. There they can be supervised. They don't have to go back and forth down the road every weekend where things can happen. And then over the years, we've been able to build up a program that meets some of the other challenges that they face. So they go from being in a primary school speaking English, speaking Chichewa, which is their mother tongue, to going to secondary school. They have to speak in English. And they're with girls from more advantaged backgrounds in these now boarding schools that we're putting them in. And even though they're the lucky ones, they're in secondary school, they're pioneers, they still face pressure to get married, a lot of social pressure. They're still at risk for HIV/AIDS. They're the demographic that's most at risk for HIV/AIDS, and they need to know what next. You know, their teachers don't know how to counsel them. The teachers don't have the same amount of time and resources to sit down and help them to think about internships or the next step, you know, what they're gonna do with their education, and their parents haven't been to school. So that's where we have worked to come up with the age approach, which is to get them into one of the best schools that we can get them into in Malawi, and to offer them some life skills training around how to stand up for themselves and to know the real implications of HIV/AIDS. And we also work with them to help them with some of the harder subjects, English and science and math, you know, which are really the ones that they're sometimes afraid of, and career counseling. So we hope that they can not necessarily be a doctor, be a nurse, whatever it is that they want. We want them to know what they want and to be able to express that and to know what steps lead to that, and also to have a plan B. I mean, in Malawi, only about 1% to 3% of people actually go into the university system. So we want them to know which paths can you get sponsorship for from the government, et cetera, and to know how to navigate their lives a bit. And so right now we are working with 21 girls this year, and we'll see some of those graduate this year. And we're working with schools and rolling out some workshops so that we can reach many, many more girls, hopefully by the end of the year, for HIV/AIDS work and career counseling work. And our goal is basically to build up this model and build up information about how to confront these challenges, and then share that more broadly with the government, with other actors, and really try to fill what we've found is such a big gap in Malawi. So that's basically our mission. And again, I just wanted a chance to say thank you and to express gratitude to get to meet some of you all here tonight, hopefully. It's been really a wonderful thing to have a story where, you know, so many different people from the Christian Science Monitor community who have been there since the beginning are still with us, and that's allowed something to happen and given me and my colleagues the opportunity to hopefully touch some girls' lives in Malawi.
You know, when I'm listening to both you and Corinne, I'm thinking about just the profound difference that a good meal can make, and the profound difference that just basic education can make in somebody's life. And I'm just interested in your experience in terms of witnessing how that basic opportunity can be so important to an individual or to a group, and transforming and meaningful. Just what have you seen, and how has it affected you, and how has it changed your perspective on how we need to think about each other and our world?
Well, I have a brief story that just happened Monday, actually. You might not believe it, but in Vermont, we're already starting to glean this growing season, and I've already gleaned hundreds of pounds of spinach from greenhouses. And on Monday, I brought in a ton of spinach, and there was a woman there in the food shelf who had just had a baby, and I had been bringing bags and bags of spinach the 3 days previously as well, and she stopped me and grabbed me and said, "You have no idea how much of a blessing this has been, because I'm anemic and my doctors told me that I have to eat more iron, but there's no possible way I could afford it. And so I've just been eating all of this spinach that you've been bringing, and it's been," I mean, she's probably green by that point, but just little stories like that where it makes such a difference seeing people take that fresh produce. And I've seen people line up before the food shelf even opens at 7 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, to have access to some of the fresh fruits and vegetables that are coming in. And I did a workshop in January where I did taste tests with all of these different local ingredients that farmers had donated, and cooked these 3 different completely local dishes and had people come in and try them. And a lot of people who use the food shelf aren't used to cooking. They've been eating out of cans their entire lives and aren't necessarily very excited about the idea of a root vegetable chowder. But I would sort of force it on them and entice them to try it. And some of them would sort of grumble and say, "Oh, well, it's okay." But others tasted it and their faces just lit up and said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea vegetables could be so good." And it's because they're local and they were picked by people who really care. And just really getting people to understand how easy it is to really have a really nutritious diet that comes right from our neighbors, and seeing the difference that makes in people's lives, and being able to get kids out into the fields and have kids so excited about harvesting things. And kids will eat anything that they grow or pick themselves. That's the secret. So if you can't get your kid to eat vegetables, have them plant a seed and watch it grow, and then they'll eat it. So just sort of making that transition and helping people make that transition, and sort of getting over that mental gap of, "But I don't know how to cook, I haven't grown up cooking," and showing that cooking doesn't have to be, this crazy architectural activity with cookbooks and fancy devices, and it can really just be a pot and some water and some local ingredients, and you're all set.
So in a sense, you're also in the education business, in the educational field.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing getting fresh food to be available to people, but it's a whole nother hurdle to try to get people to actually use it and understand why it's good for them and why it's important. And so the education component is definitely crucial.
Yeah, Xanthe, could you sort of talk about the relationship of food and education? I mean, these are people making less than $1 a day, subsistence. How does education sort of transform their life and their overall well-being?
Yeah, I think we need to bring Corinne over to Malawi. That's actually, education about nutrition, I think, is very difficult, and there's a lot that can be gained, but people are very stuck in their ways. People will usually depend on a subsistence crop and a couple of cash crops, and that's what they're eating, and that's what's making up their diet. And there are certain traditions around the way that a compound is kept. Compound is swept, so the ground is hard and packed and clean, as opposed to taking the leaves and using those leaves to then further fertilize the field, or to promote growth in the areas around the compound. There are areas that can be used more productively than they are. But again, people are very stuck in their ways, and they wouldn't want to be the one with a messy area around their house. And so those people that are working on that issue in Malawi, I think it's a long-term investment to just slowly change people's minds and show that there are ways that you can grow greater variety. And there's a tremendous variety of food that can grow in Malawi. But even for our girls who are going to, again, one of the best secondary schools, they eat beans and rice, beans and rice, beans and rice. That's really what they're eating. Maybe some sort of collard greens. So there's, not as much thinking around that as there could be, and I think there's plenty of room for growth in that area. But there is an overlap in the idea of being stuck in our ways. This is what we do. This is how we do it, and I think that affects our girls in the sense that the girls are now breaking out of that because they're going away. They're going away to secondary school. So when they come home, they're not necessarily fitting into the mold. They're not adapting to the same to the same social structure in the same way. And so hopefully the process of education gives people that sense of identity where they can start to question and they can become comfortable being the one crazy lady with the messy compound who all of a sudden is now actually growing produce, and people start to look at and say, maybe that's not such a bad idea. So, hopefully those are processes that can complement each other as people break out of, traditions.
I know AGE, Advancing Girls' Education in Africa, has only recently started, but, I think about America and its great tradition of promoting education, but so often in the American culture, it's about leaving where you came from and going and establishing a new life. Education is your way out and not necessarily your way to come back and improve the circumstances from which you came. How do you think about that in terms of these girls, and how do the girls think about that in terms of how they're going to use their education? And is that something that you even want them to think about, or do you want them just to feel that freedom that comes and they can do whatever they want with it?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a balance, and it's a very tough question. And the person who thinks about that most is our program director, Ben Chambers, who spends so much time with the girls. And the girls will always say that they want to get educated and get a job so that they can help their families. That's what we always hear from them. And I believe that that is a very strong part of people's motivation. The family structure is very close, and people have sacrificed to get their children in school. Like I was telling you, girls have responsibility in the household, so that's being foregone for them to be able to go to school. But of course, they're going to be exposed to other opportunities. They could go and work in town. And so there is a certain freedom that you want people to have so that they can pursue whatever they're meant to do. I think we had the strongest example of that sort of tension is where we've had one scholar who was really completely amazing, first in her class, had come from a very poor village, inaccessible by road, one of 8 children, and her father had died. But she had worked very hard, and she had done so well. We were able to pick her up in our program, and she qualified to be in one of the best schools. And then one of our close friends and supporters said, okay, I've heard about this girl. I'd like to be able to help her to get over to Phillips Exeter Academy for summer school. And Phillips Exeter Academy has an amazing director of the summer school there that has a vision of trying to bring in people from all different walks of life. So we brought her over, and now she's exposed to lots of different ideas. She's seen U.S. University campus and had to deal with some of those different questions. And so I think that the role that we played in that situation was not to try to predetermine what her path should be, but also to be aware of any biases we have. American University is not necessarily the best thing for her. The best thing for her will be to find her own path, and she has been saying she would like to go to the University of Malawi. She would like to study to be a doctor, and we hope that she can have that chance because she wants to be able to give back and be a doctor serving her community, and so we want to support her. So I think it's an important tension. We try to help them, and as we build our capacity to help them more, hopefully in the future we'll be able to help them to go back to their communities with special projects and to see the impact that they can have and the power that they can have. But there's no one solution to that. I think there's no one easy answer. It depends so much on a person, and even a person who leaves Africa, goes to another country to study, can then have such an incredible impact on their own country, their own community, just as someone who stays and serves their community for a lifetime can. So there's no easy answer.
I have to admit that before reading your story, I wasn't exactly sure where Malawi was. But we do have the Maparium here. I don't know. But unfortunately, that presents the world of 1935, so it wasn't a big help. So if you could just give us a little orientation about Malawi, and if we do go to the Maparium during our public hours of operation, what it would be called in 1935.
Sure, sure. Well, it's in Southeast Africa. It's a long, thin country which is bordered by Lake Malawi and the source of a lot of different kinds of fish and beautiful landscapes. And just above it is Zambia. The time of the Maparium would have been called Nyasa Land, next to Rhodesia. And you know, it's a country that we don't hear a lot about, probably because it's peaceful. You know, it's a poor country for Africa. It's ranking, you know, towards the bottom in terms of poverty indexes. And again, it's mainly agricultural, and it was colonized by the British, so the language is English and Chichewa.
One thing that impressed me about both of these women is that, you know, as Xanthe talks about her program director and all this sort of stuff, it feels like a big organization, but it's really very shoestring for both of you,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, talk about your program director a little bit and his how he lives there and all that. And I mean, because you've taken ideas, and I'm just thinking, if somebody else wanted to take this idea, how much does it take?
Right.
I mean, is it a full-time job? Is it, does it take a lot of money?
Right. Well, fortunately for this, my experience has been that if you're emotionally committed to it, it can work. I mean, people have come to this idea and said, okay, I'll work with this. And obviously, I couldn't possibly have done this by myself. So there's been, you know, a team of people that have been emotionally committed to it 100%. And then the hours are a little bit different. That doesn't mean full-time all the time. But what we've done is we've decided we are trying to grow the organization. That is the goal. We're trying to expand, reach more girls, and get these ideas out there. So we're still sort of on that curve. And for that reason, we've decided more than just volunteering, which is a great way to do it as well. More than just volunteering, we want to get some people in here who are leading this, holding it together, and giving us that opportunity to institutionalize. And so that's the goal. So for that reason, we wanted someone on the ground in Malawi. We wanted to know what's happening. We want to have direct communication. And so that's Ben Chambers. And we actually recruited him out of Peace Corps. So Peace Corps, you know, continues to be a really important opportunity for young people to get out to places in Africa and to do really important work and community development work in a way that's hard to come by in terms of experience. And they have a strong education program in Malawi. Ben was actually teaching in school, teaching English for a couple of years, which, just to give you the mental image, I think he's about 6'3" or 4, long blonde hair, you know, really sticks out. So he's pretty known in Malawi, so that's good for us. So he wasn't ready to come home, so we were able to bring him on as program director. He now lives at one of our partner schools, and he's a very adaptable guy in the sense that, you know, he eats his meals with the sisters there. This is a Catholic government school, and he eats the beans and rice, and he lives there, and he lives the life that the girls live in a certain way, which is a very rigorous life. They wake up 3:30 in the morning, they're up, they start their chores, they're washing, they're cooking, they're, you know, getting everything ready for school. They're going to early study hours, then they're going to class at 7. And so he leads a very involved and rigorous life there. And he's able to do that in a way that we're able to manage on our budget. And so that makes that work for us. And then back in the US, we have a fabulous executive director who's here tonight, Sarah Lance, and she leads the charge of our organization. And there's a lot that goes on there, both in terms of trying to get our program to the place where it's just ready to reach more people and get the information out. And also trying to get our organization to that same place, trying to move along that growth path so that we feel we can have more impact. So there's a lot that goes into that in the US in terms of outreach, bringing more people into our circle in a way.
And you have 2 paid positions.
Exactly. And then we have just a great group of people that maybe come for a while, maybe come and work on the board for a long time. and steer the organization. We have a small but committed board. We have the founding team, and we have volunteers that hear about us, sometimes through media such as The Monitor, and say, I have a specific skill set, I'd like to get involved. And those people become very important to our organization as well. So it's through that channel of interest in the issue and commitment to the issue, that's what's made it work for us. And that's what I think is so rewarding, that it's not about any one of us, it's about the issue and the people that come to work on the issue. And so that's what guides us. Anytime that it's challenging, we know that there's a whole team of other people who are pushing for this, and we can move this forward and make this work.
Yeah, I think similarly with the Gleaning program, I think both of our organizations sort of grew because people pushed them to, and it wasn't someone getting out and saying, all right, I want to make this happen, but it was sort of everyone coming together and almost forcing that growth in a really, really positive way. And I mean, compared to you, I have no legitimate organization whatsoever. And I've sort of resisted going the nonprofit route and having a formal mission statement or having an official organization, just because of the nature of Gleaning and because it's this historical tradition that's been passed down for generations. And to me, it's a lot more about sort of connecting the gaps in the food system and using the organizations that are already working on sustainable agriculture and hunger in Vermont, rather than sort of forging a new path. So I've sort of been trying to sort of connect the dots more so, and but it's always funny because people ask me, well, how can I publicize it? Like, what's your organization called? It's like, well, we're not an organization, and I don't know if we have a name. Maybe it's the Addison County Gleaning Program. Tomorrow it'll be the Vermont Gleaning Project. I don't know. And so I'm just sort of now figuring out the process of trying to transition and trying to maybe make it a little more formalized in terms of having a set coordinator. But it's really just about finding volunteers at the community level, and it's nothing formal at all, which is why it's so easy for anyone to start anywhere. And even it's only just now, a year later, that I'm sort of trying to start a website and something that people can look at if they're interested. I'm stubbornly illiterate when it comes to social media, but I'm getting there, so we'll see.
David, I'm curious, when after Xanthe's article came out, were you surprised by the response of the readers, or did that seem to kind of make sense to you?
Well, the scale of it was not normal. I mean, it was, and as Xanthe said, it really was a story about what are the economics of a family living on $1 a day. And so it was very focused on that and very detailed. She'd done a lot of research and really focused on that. So surprised at the scale of it, but the Monitor had gone through something similar with the Jill Carroll situation, where readers really rallied around and sent money in to support her family and to support people that like her translator and others. So we'd had some experience with the generosity of readers there. But we'd never had experience where readers were sending in money and saying, we really want to specifically help this person overseas, and we didn't know how to manage that at all. When I listen to Xanthe and Corinne talking about this, it's very gratifying as an editor, because you feel like, what we ideally hope is that we're communicating with a community of people who do care about the world, who are engaged with the world. Mm-hmm. And when they do, when we see like these things happen, we say, well, that's proof of it. We're reaching a community of people who are interested in solutions and care about the world, and they want to take action. And that's the community we like to be with and like to connect with. And so if we can somehow facilitate that, that's great.
So when you're writing or editing a story, how do you think of your reader? What's the kind of image or feeling that you have in mind of the person or people that you're presenting this for?
We have studies and surveys that tell us more or less who these readers are, and they do tend to be people who are, have money and are well-traveled and are well-educated and tend to be older, at least in the magazine. On the web, it's a younger demographic. But in terms of, often they tell us how we should think. You know, I mean, we hear back from them, and the comments are often of the nature as, well, I expect more from the Christian Science Monitor. You know, I expect more Christianity from you. I expect you to be more unbiased, and they hold us to a high standard, and that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we would like to hear from you tonight. There's a mic here in the middle of the room, and we'd just love to hear any kind of questions or thoughts you have for anyone or all of us in the panel. So feel free to step up, and we're here to answer any thoughts or questions you might have.
I have a question sort of for David, and sort of about how the Monitor gets involved with these people making a difference. I confess I don't know anything about newspapers other than that I like to read them. So I'm sort of curious how you get involved. I mean, it's easy to see how you get involved with Xanthe, but how you find someone like Corinne or the other people making a difference that I've read, and how you decide how to bring their story to a wider audience and what goes on behind the scenes, sort of.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you know that there is that specific article that is the first full article that we have in each edition. It's People Making a Difference. And we put that there for a reason, as a statement about who we are. And how we find people like that, sometimes they find us. I mean, in Corinne's case, Greg Lamb, the reporter who wrote about her, had already gone to Middlebury and done another story at another time. An environment story. What was that about?
It was on a new biomass plant at Middlebury College.
And the public relations guy at Middlebury knew about Corinne, and he called Greg and said, "You might be interested in this other story." So it's that kind of we get contacts from people who say, "Oh, the Monitor would be interested in this story. They know who we are and the kind of things we do," so we get that. I think. The reporters who work for the Monitor, you know, they all know who we are and what we're about. So the injure no man, bless all mankind thing, they get that. And so they're constantly looking for people making a difference. I mean, it's part of, as they're reporting and talking to people, they're thinking, oh, well, that will be a good person to talk to about that. So they sort of gravitate and find that in the course of their work.
So the readers sort of enter into this process of making a difference. It's not a passive activity.
Yeah, and in fact, we do get emails from readers saying, you profiled this person, but you really should be talking to this person too. You know, this person is a fascinating story. I mean, I get probably 1 or 2 of those a week and forward them on to the appropriate people if they're not in my area. But yeah.
And as you sort of are looking forward to this People Making a Difference series, have there been sort of new revelations to you, or that you find that there's all kinds of stuff going on in the world in this regard that you never could have imagined prior to engaging in this series?
Well, I have to say again that my job as the international editor, I don't necessarily focus on this 100% of the time. Greg Lamb is the PMAD, People Making a Difference editor, and so he does focus on this full time. What he will say is that, I mean, he's always impressed by how wide a range of people and from all around the world that pop up in his mailbox, either proposed by the reporters or from other people. So for him, it's more of a process of trying to figure out, well, have we done anything on microfinance lately, or have we done anything on education lately? And oh, this one's really different. This is a filmmaker, you know. I guess in this issue we have one about a woman working in Niger with nomads. How do you educate nomads? You know, if they're always on the move, how do you educate them? And she's figured that out. And so, yeah, if that answers your question or not, Jonathan.
No, it gives me an idea, absolutely. Well, I mean, these were revelations to me, just as a man on the street, general reader. I had no idea of, I mean, I knew about gleaning from reading the Bible, but I had no idea it was still going on. And it's, oh, yes. Please.
My question is for Xanthe. Just to ask you if you might elaborate a little bit on something you said at the beginning when you talked about primary education being free in Malawi and secondary education being fee-based. And I guess my question a little bit is, how does that work in sort of an economic way in Malawi? Do the teachers that teach in the primary level, how are they paid? And in secondary education, how much of that youth population gets to even take advantage of that secondary education?
Thank you. Well, primary education is subsidized by the government since the late 1990s, and that's been true in a number of African countries. There's been a big global push for universal primary education. So the government subsidizes that and will send money to the schools for the number of children that are there. And that's really had a huge impact in terms of getting kids in school. I think it's about 97% of kids that get enrolled in primary school, meaning the equivalent of grades 1 through 8. Then at the secondary level, tuition comes in. The government is still paying teacher salaries, both at the primary and at the secondary level, and paying for the school structures, but the families are asked to make those contributions at the secondary level, which are significant. It's about a quarter of girls that are getting in, and a slightly larger number of boys that are getting into secondary schools. What we see, though, is that the retention, especially for girls, really starts to drop off. And so there are various different statistics, but it's probably around 1 in 10 girls that can actually finish secondary school. And within the structure of the economy in Malawi, more students finishing secondary school would have lots of different benefits. So far, the research that we've seen indicates that the secondary school leavers are finding productive ways to use their education. So far, there isn't a feeling that everything is completely saturated and that secondary school leavers aren't going to be able to do something productive. To the contrary, there are certainly productive things they can do. Also, the education itself has such a positive effect on their own lives. So secondary education in Malawi for girls is very highly correlated with girls having a much later age of marriage, of first sexual intercourse, and the rate of HIV/AIDS. So that's just in one area, but also their ability to have an influence in their household and to have their own children be educated, all of those factors. So there are so many reasons why we would like to see a lot more investment there. Rather than the feeling that all of this effort at the primary level has gotten us to a point, but then we've fallen off, and there hasn't been a continuation, even for the ones who are very highly achieving. We want to see a link there. We want to see that it's not just the more advantaged children, but even the disadvantaged children, especially the ones that are really dedicated and working hard, there's a chance that they can get through this system. That's what we really would like to see. So that's why we're trying in a very small way to plug that hole, and also advocating on a larger level.
My question is for both Corinne and Xanthe. And I'm curious to know whether you encountered resistance in your efforts, whether it be from the beneficiaries of your efforts or from people that you tried to partner with. I, for instance, tried to give a large quantity of fresh produce to the Pine Street Inn here in Boston, and they wouldn't accept it because it was they felt it was an uncontrolled commodity. It wasn't canned, so they didn't know where it had been. So I just am curious to know from both of you how you dealt with it, if you encountered any, and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, I would say that there's been very little resistance, but Food shelves definitely tend to be skeptical of fresh produce, and they're starting to sort of make that switch over to really embracing fresh food as an incredibly nutritious asset to the shelf. But it's taking a little while, and it's definitely, when food shelves are used to dealing with commodity items and non-perishables and foods that come in cans and packages, it can be really hard for them to make that switch over to food that they have to get out really quickly to people. But I think the way to start is to sort of introduce vegetables that people are really excited about and fresh foods that are very recognizable to people. So, like potatoes and carrots and things like that, things that people already know how to cook or can just eat raw. And once food pantries start to learn how to deal with that and how to distribute it, then you can make the jump to some of the more challenging vegetables like rutabagas or things like that. I wouldn't suggest trying that right off the bat. But we were actually talking earlier about how we're both really blessed just because on a very basic level, both of our projects are very non-controversial in nature. At least I think so. I mean, it seems like everyone would want girls in Africa to get a better education, and everyone wants people to eat better food who can't afford it. And so it's been really amazing just to hear almost only support from people. And I know that I've just been amazed at how generous farmers are and how excited they are to donate their produce because they've worked so hard to grow it and they don't want to see it go to waste. And so it's really been inspiring to just have every door and every sort of window in my path open. And I'm sure that I'll encounter resistance at some point in the future, but it hasn't really happened yet. Knock on wood.
Yeah, I think you said it for both of us. We haven't experienced resistance. Families want their girls going to school. Malawi, everybody's been very cooperative. Our partner school in particular, we have one very strong partner school that they, even before we got there, they were trying to figure out ways to help girls. So they've just been a natural partner. They already had an initiative and we've been able to give wind to that. So I wouldn't say we have resistance in that sense. So certainly there are challenges just as in any task and lessons learned along the way. But people are generally in favor of what we're doing, and the other NGOs, non-governmental organizations that are out there are not competitive, looking to share lessons, hopefully looking to partner. It's something that needs to be done, and everyone recognizes that. So.
I think too, though, your question, Mark, really illustrates the need for both action on a local level, like getting fresh produce to the food shelf, but also what's needed in terms of a national and international movement and really changing both from the bottom up and from the top down. So why is it that we do have a food system that focuses on getting commodity items out to people when we could be feeding people the healthiest food in the world? Why is that the case? And why does the Pine Street Inn not accept the freshest food available, and why would they rather give people Kraft mac and cheese? And so I think it's really all about sort of pushing the barrier as much as you can and trying to get people to reconsider their notions about what people should be eating and what we should be distributing to low-income families, and really trying to approach it from all levels, both at the government and at the grassroots level.
What about a sort of quieter and more subtle form of resistance, which would be cynicism, that that is just sort of embedded in the human condition, that some people are losers and some people are winners, and that there are going to be some people who are on the short end, and that it's all very well and good to make these efforts, but there's a sort of just status quo of what the human experience is about. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think those people exist, and then I always just find ways to prove them wrong, I guess. And so one of the most exciting things for me recently was I got to go out to Oregon and visit all of these different gleaning groups in Oregon. And gleaning is so popular in Oregon. I had no idea that it existed that way. But I was able to meet with all these different gleaning coordinators, and it works very differently out there. Like, my volunteers are primarily retired people or college students or working professionals on their lunch break. But in Oregon, the gleaners are the low-income families, and they get basically their entire diet through farm gleaning and through food rescue from grocery stores. And they were just telling me about how empowering it was to be able to provide their entire diet through gleaning and not have to spend any money on groceries. And they talked to me all about their sort of big saying was how it was all about giving themselves a hand up instead of a hand out. And I just really took that to heart, and I was so inspired by their vision and their passion, and just the fact that, you know, they came from really impoverished families. A lot of them had multiple siblings, and there wasn't enough food to go around, and they found these really creative ways to change that. And so that's just a great example of course, everyone is born into an unequal social class, and the whole social inequality and class structure is something that we have to think deeply about. But at the same time, people are changing that left and right, and they're finding ways to do so.
How about for you, Xanthe?
Yeah, I think these are social justice questions, and inevitably in these systems there are people with interests, there are people with advantages, and there are people that don't have as many advantages. And we're trying to address some of that in Malawi by helping some of these girls with the awareness that the disadvantaged girls have basically no shot of making it up through the secondary system on their own. And even if they did, their chances of passing those exams are just very, very slim. So that is the central issue that we're trying to address. And just as we're doing the actions and getting the scholarships over, hopefully that gives us the ability to then also engage in those broader questions. And there's a change at a systemic level, which, you know, we all hope to see, certainly in our own country and in Malawi, where there's a more equitable education system with better quality education available for more people. But then at the same time, at the individual level, just as you were saying, there's a change that happens within the person with the realization that there is a way to conquer what's happening here and then to become an agent of change. And I think that's something that we've seen, where these girls start to realize that what they're getting isn't a form of charity, it's an opportunity to work hard. If they work very hard and they earn their place at the table, you know, they have to earn and keep this place, then they have just as much right to be there as any other girl, regardless of what her family background is. And that will lead to opportunities, and those opportunities they can then transform into helping other girls and actually becoming an agent in this cycle. So I think that is something that we can see more visibly. The broader question, the bigger picture, is something that we hope to chip away at and to work on, to bring awareness to, both on the global level, you know, what kind of funding and interest can we generate, and on the national level, what's happening with the scholarship process at the national level, who's getting it, and how could it be more efficient so that even things in the system that are not intended to exclude anyone, but just bureaucratic processes that just don't work for girls that can't self-advocate. You know, try to bring awareness to some of those issues as well.
Can I just follow up on that quickly, Xanthe? Because you've had setbacks. I mean, Selena, the first girl that was in the story, she did not stay in school, right? And you've had critical media or some critical media coverage. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think...
I mean, is that discouraging, or do you feel like, you know?
Yeah, well, so what you're referring to, Nessie, Selena's daughter, we gave her a scholarship for the first year, and after that year, she finished 8th grade, and then she accepted a marriage proposal. And we were all a little bit heartbroken. You know, we'd all really come to love her, and she just has this gorgeous smile and these dimples, and we really thought she was going to be able to take this and run with it, and we all had sort of bonded to her through the process of hearing her story and seeing her picture and getting to know her a bit. But So that was very sad for us, but at the same time, it gives us a chance to look at what it is that we're offering, look at the entrenched social customs and norms and the ideas that the girls have, and ask ourselves, what is it that we're trying to do here? Because we could put girls into the community school and help more girls. It's a less expensive way to do that. And there will be some benefit. There's certainly benefit to going to school for however many years we're able to help the girls stay in school. That's one way to do it. But on the other hand, if we want to see more coming out of this work and we want to see more longevity in the lives of these girls, we're going to have to do so much more. And so those disappointments hopefully turn into learning moments. And we hope to have more successes than cases like that. But we have to realize that we're dealing with individuals. And we're dealing with people whose lives are complicated by more factors than we can possibly appreciate, including health issues, family issues, social pressures. And so we've got to give them something to really believe in, and we've got to let them define their own goals. And we have to find ways of measuring success that are fair and realistic. So, these are important parts of the story.
Yeah, and you're learning that as you go, and I'm sure you're managing not only your expectations, but the expectations of donors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a different world. So.
Please allow me to make a couple of quick points before I ask a question. First, I would like to thank the library and the Monitor representative for putting this program on. I think it's fascinating to have the impact of the media and with social entrepreneurs. Secondly, I would like to compliment the two guests for this evening. You represent the now and you represent the promise. And it's just really very exciting to see what you're doing, especially at your age, taking advantage of the education you have and what you're trying to do with it. The third comment I would make is that I've had the opportunity to be concerned with some of the same issues you're concerned with on a global basis as part of my business interests. And I would make just this comment. I'm aware that out of some 6.7 billion people in the world, the estimates that I see, there's probably some 2 billion people surviving on a bowl of rice a day. And there's probably 1 billion people a day sleeping under the 1 billion people in the world today sleeping under the stars. No tent, no lean-to, no house, no shelter. So that's why I refer to you as the promise, because the problems are so huge and the opportunity to be of service is so great. I'm very grateful that you're here and that you're making that progress. So now my question. David brought out the point that how you're not a very big organization. How do you do this? And I don't think it's a very good model to plan to rely on the Monitor to give you a story once a month so that you can move forward. But maybe they'll do that because maybe you'll still be attracting their interest. So my question is, what are you doing in the realm of media for yourself? Do you individually have your own websites? Do you have your own webmasters? Or what kind of programming? I see these beautiful flips that's been going on here, and I thought, are those on their website? Do they have a website? Because there's now 1.6 billion people with access to the internet, and a story well told is going to bring you a lot of attention. And the Monitor understands the website 24/7, csmonitor.com. So they're aware of it. So my question, are you aware of it? And what are you doing to exploit that opportunity to support what you're doing?
That's a great question and a great challenge. And definitely something that I've been trying to work on recently, and I've been trying to, I'm starting to create a website and a blog, and I think there are a couple of people who are interested in doing videos about the Gleaning Project and that in general, and I've made it my goal for 2010 to take a picture at every Glean, because we did so many Gleans in 2009 and I barely have pictures of any of them. And so just in a really small way, those are sort of my baby steps into that approach. But I think we definitely shouldn't underestimate the power of the media, and it's so important, and it's such a great strategic tool for just spreading the word about what we're doing and what other people are doing, and a great way for people to get involved. And I'm trying to figure out how I can become more of an online presence, even though the work that I do is so physical and on the ground, literally.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. The media is incredibly powerful, and we've been fortunate to have coverage from the Monitor, sort of tracking our progress over the years.
About once a year, not once a month, about once a year.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Although, if you want to consider that, David.
Okay.
But no, that's been really important to us, and that's been a self-reflective process as well. I mean, that's been, a unbiased way for our people who have been following the story from the beginning to see how this is evolving. And so that's been really important. And that's also led to some other opportunities. We had coverage from CBS about our scholar Ida, who came over to Phillips Exeter Academy, which was a moving and important piece for us. And at the Fletcher and Tufts community, local communities, small stories that have helped to keep up the steam and sometimes bring volunteers in. We do have a website, which is ageafrica.org, and we have some blogs from Ben Chambers, our program director, and some of the girls' notes that they've written as well. And we try to do as much as we can with that. At the same time, even though, thank you for saying that I'm young, but not young enough to totally have mastered, Facebook and Twitter and all of that. I think that was a few years. I was a few years ahead of that. But those are really powerful sources as well, and things that as we build capacity, we would like to be more involved in. But we also really rely on word of mouth and actually connecting with people. And so we have events and try to ask people to bring their friends, and so we can actually tell the story and engage with people, particularly because so few people have had the opportunity to go to Africa, but they would like to know, they'd like to know the story. So we try to do, any chance we have to actually talk to people or to send out newsletters with stories and photos and try to share a human experience. We also really rely on that to spread the word. Thank you.
Well, we'll take one more question.
This is, I realize we're near the end, but if you could, I want to ask you about sort of go back to the very beginning. You've both done a really good job of explaining how your activities got rolling and how you and sort of built. And but can you kind of roll back the reel a little bit further and tell us a little bit about sort of where this really started for you, each of you? I mean, were you people who were always interested in poverty issues, or just helping other people, or was it education and food, or the environment in Africa, or where was the sort of the seed of this for you?
Let's see. I would say that my love affair with plants and agriculture dates back to when I was little. I think this story might actually be in the piece that was written in the Monitor, but my parents always tell this story to their friends about how when I was 4 and I had just moved and had no friends, and I befriended this ugly bush in my backyard, and would just talk to it all day long and tell it all of my 4-year-old woes. And then one day my dad came in all proud because he had no idea that I spent hours a day with this bush, and he was so proud because he had just chopped down this ugly bush in the backyard. And I immediately started bawling, and I locked myself in my room and refused to talk to him for days, and accused him of murdering my best friend. And he said it was the worst he's ever felt in his life. But I guess when I was in high school, I spent a semester working on an organic farm, and that's when I really became interested in agriculture. And at Middlebury, I was really involved in the climate movement and sort of the youth climate movement, and really focusing on solutions to climate change. And honestly, got a little bit burnt out with that, and it felt like it felt like I was constantly working and wasn't getting anywhere. And then I sort of got back into farming and into agriculture, and I just felt immediately grounded. And to me, working with plants and working with food is an incredibly healing and nurturing process. And I just really wanted to be able to share that. And gleaning, for me, was a really incredible way to sort of combine my passion for farming and agriculture with my desire to really move towards a social justice paradigm and work on that as much in my daily life as I could. So yeah, I sort of came from it from all these different angles, sort of climate activism, and I started a social justice group at Middlebury as well, and gleaning was really, I didn't realize until I saw it, but it was just the perfect marriage of all of those.
What was your first gleaning experience?
I mean, unofficially, just I guess from the garden and the farm, bringing it to the food shelf. Officially, I went out with the food bank. I think my first glean might have been a raspberry glean, which is a really good way to start.
Well, I think I've always been interested in understanding other cultures, and where I've had the opportunity to go and do work. At first in Latin America, I had a chance to do study abroad during university, which was a really wonderful experience. It gave me a chance to try to understand how international development and the World Bank and other actors had interacted with national politics in Argentina and how that had affected people. And was always really concerned with trying to understand those very large dynamics and impact on the economy and what that meant for people's lives. And so while at Fletcher, I had the chance to go to a new region, to go to Africa for the first time. And I had a first experience of going beyond that and actually getting out into the community and interacting with people in the community and seeing how projects were affecting people's lives. You know, women getting a small amount of money to build a road that would connect their village out to the main road, and getting to see how communities function. And that was really meaningful for me. But although I'd worked in a couple of different areas in development by that point, I didn't necessarily have an area that was my area. And this very serendipitously occurred that there was an opportunity to start an education project. And so through this process, I've learned so much more about education and been able to come into contact with so many experts in this field. And that's what I'm, now made my career out of. And I'm continuing that. I'm finishing a dissertation that looks at education in northern Uganda. And so I've had the chance to compare different countries and different dynamics. And it's just sort of taken over my life in the best way and become so meaningful, given that I've been able to be active in the process and feel that what's happening is making a difference, which I think is, in a way, what we're all looking for. So.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Corinne and Xanthe and David, for such a beautiful discussion. And I agree so much with one of our questioners that you fill us with a sense of promise. And in that vein, I just want to make sure that the audience knows that we have a promise here too at the library, and part of that promise is to make sure that we continue to bring you programs of this kind that inspire and help to give us a sense of how we can follow in the spirit of Mary Baker Eddy in terms of bringing transformation, bringing progress, bringing care and healing to our world. So in the fall, we'll be doing this again with other PMADs, or people who are making a difference in our world. So we'll be collaborating again with the Christian Science Monitor. So please look out for that event coming in the fall. We invite you to join our panelists out in the atrium, in the lobby, after the conversation, after we close. They have some display tables, and you can learn more about their organizations. So thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again.